When it comes to British politicians, we're used to them misbehaving. A rogues gallery of scoundrels. But there was one man that paved the way when it came to scandal. He had it all. Money, lies, and sex. And his name?
Jeffrey Archer.
Jeffrey Archer.
Jeffrey Archer.
Jeffrey Archer.
When people think of Jeffrey Archer, they think of scandal.
A woman who said she was a prostitute claimed she'd met Mr. Archer in Shepherd's Market.
They think of prostitutes, paying people off, perjury.
It's such high drama the whole time.
Of course you think of books, but I always think of the posh lord who's been found out.
Jeffrey Archer is the original Teflon Tory. Nothing ever sticks.
Sometimes he would bounce back higher than he'd started.
I hate being offered any appointment or any job at the top because you can't go anywhere else. I like starting at the bottom. It's much more fun.
He just wanted everyone to look at him.
He lies in court.
I'm damned if I'll spend the rest of my life with someone saying that I was out looking for a prostitute.
And everyone believes him. He persuades John Major to make him a lord. And then makes a play to be London mayor.
London needs a voice and London needs a champion.
But eventually the lies come back to bite him. Hard.
Tonight, Belmarsh Prison in South London is Jeffrey Archer's new address.
You made a mistake, you made a fool of yourself, shed the tears, get on.
But not even a stretch of porridge could dampen his ambition.
Jeffrey Archer went to prison and turned it into material.
He gets a book deal. He gets a huge book deal.
Okay.
He's got that bomb-proof personality.
My only failure was success.
He's the sort who will never be ruined.
What happened was I did too well.
I'm amazed he didn't make it right to the very top of the Tory party.
It's 1985, and Jeffrey Archer is the ultimate self-made man. A multi-millionaire novelist with a yuppie penthouse overlooking a view of Parliament.
Beyond the motivation to be someone, he always wanted to make money, and he did make a lot of money.
Archer has hit the big time, thanks to his best-selling books. But what he really wants is a top-flight career in politics and an invite to Margaret Thatcher's Conservative Party.
Jeffrey Archer was only too eager to tell us about his story of 4 young MPs struggling to become Prime Minister.
You yourself were once a young MP. Would you rather be Prime Minister than writing novels about...
Oh yes, much rather.
He positions himself as an invaluable Tory man about town, raising money and lifting party spirits.
He was hugely popular. That was due to Jeffrey's personality.
Good morning, ladies.
He would go around chatting to Tories and he would ask them to write to the Prime Minister and say how well he'd done.
Thatcher was a Prime Minister, a party leader who believed in people pulling themselves up by their bootstraps.
Archer's hard work pays off, and Margaret Thatcher appoints him as Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, a junior administrative role with little responsibility. Not that you'd know that, listening to Jeffrey.
I've enjoyed writing the books. They've given me immense happiness. But when the Prime Minister rang last night and said, would you like to be Deputy Chairman, I was very excited.
He was getting closer and closer to the centre of the party.
What the country needs at the moment, most of all, is leadership at every level. Not just the Prime Minister, every level.
It all looked like it was going swimmingly for Jeffrey, but looks can be deceiving.
Then, on the evening of Saturday the 25th of October, the news of the world hit the streets. Tory boss Archer pays off Vice Girl.
After a day under siege by the press, the Archer family emerged from their Cambridgeshire home to offer their garden guests a consolation coffee.
You know, we all do foolish things under stress, particularly when we choose to be unadvised.
Jeffrey Archer's wife, Mary, always stood by Jeffrey and always made excuses for him.
No, but have I left anybody unspoken before? I think I have.
Mary making the tea for the journalist and playing it all down and smiling nicely made her a human shield.
There was nothing further from Mr. Archer on his ill-fated attempt to buy off a prostitute.
Archer might not be saying anything publicly, but in private you couldn't shut him up.
This story came out from the News of the World that
Geoffrey had been consorting with this prostitute. So I rang up Geoffrey and I said to him, Geoffrey, what's going on? What have you been up to this time? And he said, Adam, I only met a girl once. I've been disgracefully set up.
That might be Archer's story, but rather inconveniently, he's caught on tape trying to pay the same girl he claims to have only met once to leave the country.
You have somewhere to go abroad.
I could go back to Tunisia.
Would you be safe there?
Yes.
And happy there?
Yes.
Well, how much money would that take?
Awkward.
I do miss the era of the tabloid sting. I do. I miss the old sort of crackly, grainy audio of somebody ruining their life over a cassette.
He has the News of the World taping him, telling her quite blatantly, you will go abroad. He was being quite firm about it.
He felt that at least if he paid her, she would go away. And people occasionally who are innocent do pay. They do pay.
A liar, possibly, or an incredibly sweet guy. How nice that he does just go, look, do you know what? If you are, I will give you money and I'll help you start again if you've not ruined my reputation.
Essentially, he was saying, and it does stretch your brain a bit to think about how this would have been the case, that she'd been making claims that he found embarrassing, and the quickest way to deal with it was to pay her to leave the country.
And things don't get any better for Geoffrey. Not only has he been recorded making his offer, but a friend has been photographed offering Monica Coughlin, the woman in question, a bundle of cash.
It's said that Geoffrey Archer's fixer has met Monica Coughlin, who is a woman of builder's profession, giving her a wad of money.
You have these photos of this bloke who was working for Geoffrey, who was wearing a very sort of dapper, long overcoat, passing her a brown envelope.
At platform 3 of Victoria Station in London. And Archer put the £50 notes in the envelope himself. It was an inch thick, said Monica Coughlin. I mean, I got in touch with the Bank of England and said, look, if you had a wad of £50 notes, how many would there be if the wad was an inch thick? And they said it would be somewhere between 10 and 15,000.
There's something a bit nostalgic about massive envelopes of cash and meeting somebody on a platform and being able to hand over cash without being caught on CCTV camera. What we had was tabloid newspapers filming and recording people. That's how anybody was caught in those days.
As the story grew, so did Archer's defiance, and he rewrites what he'd first told journalists.
Within 48 hours, he changed his story and said he'd never met her. He was trying to save his political career.
So why is he giving an envelope full of cash to this man to give to this woman who he's never met before?
He's never met her, he doesn't know her, he's never had sexual relations or any other kind of relations with her. However, yes, somebody was giving her a wad of money on his behalf, so that's not much of a story, is it? It's not worthy of one of his plots.
Archer may think he's managed to buy his way out of a sex scandal and that his political career is safe, but the reality is that things are about to get a whole lot worse for the Teflon Tory. Geoffrey Archer is a man who has it all. A multi-million-pound publishing career, the ear of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and according to one tabloid newspaper, a fondness for paying for sex. Only two of these things are considered good conservative values.
He was thought to be attractive to voters, but at the same time, perhaps the wiser elements within the party thought he was very dangerous and, an accident waiting to happen.
While this story is hanging over Archer, it makes his position as deputy chairman untenable, and he had no option but to resign.
He denies it, and you can see him thinking, well, that's it.
But that isn't it. Unfortunately for Archer, the media is far from finished with the story.
The News of the World have been careful not to say that Archer slept with Monica Coughlin. They believed it, but they couldn't prove it. So they just said that Archer had paid off Monica Coughlin with his money. The Daily Star went further and did say that Archer had slept with her.
The Daily Star actually said he'd paid for sex.
And that, for him, crossed the line. Margaret Thatcher didn't like anything that involved sexual misbehaviour. So you really had to clear your name sharpish or you were going to be out of her camp. He was desperate to stay in with Thatcher. As soon as he saw this story, he knew he was going into the wilderness unless he actually fought it.
Backed into a corner, Archer goes for broke. He claims the allegations are nothing but lies.
He proceeded to sue both the News of the World and the Star, which had followed up the story, for libel.
I suppose he couldn't afford to ignore it because it was too big, too much of a splash. People would say, why aren't you suing? You know, no smoke without fire.
But Archer was no stranger to the law courts. This wasn't the first time he had sued in order to defend his reputation from an accusation of wrongdoing. Archer has form.
It wasn't the first time that Archer had sued for libel. Back in 1969, when a former Conservative MP was making allegations that he'd fizzled his expenses while working for the United Nations Association, Archer was in danger of being overthrown as candidate for the Louth by-election. And the only way he could stop the story getting any further coverage was to issue a libel writ.
Good afternoon. Jeffrey Archer, your Conservative candidate.
And that's what happened in this case as well.
Good afternoon.
This highlights the ego of the man. Incredible, impenetrable ego of the man that he decides to sue for libel.
He had that sort of sublime belief in himself that he could get out of any difficult situation by charm, by wit, by fantasy. Doubt is not one of his problems.
This self-belief has always seen Archer push his luck, even as far back as his days as a young athlete, as seen in this incredible grandstand clip.
I think there's a very telling clip where he's on the starting lineup. He was a very keen athlete, very good athlete, and he keeps jumping the gun.
Yes, Archer caused the break.
Hang on.
And again, it is Archer, I think, who caused it.
And what was fascinating about that is it just betrays his psychology. His psychology is, what am I going to do? I'm going to gamble.
Gambling is a way of life for Archer. From the athletics track in the 60s to his penthouse flat in the 80s, where he gambled that throwing his wealth around would gain him influence in Margaret Thatcher's Tory party.
Everybody knew he was rich. Everybody knew he was fun. He gave wonderful champagne parties in his flat.
We were always hearing about these parties that Jeffrey Archer had, where people were served Krug champagne and ate shepherd's pie, and he had this amazing James Bond-type flat overlooking the Thames.
There would be the cream of the Conservative Party. Most of the ministers were there. Certainly Mrs. Thatcher's entourage was there. She often was there herself.
You got to drink absolutely lashings of Krug champagne, but at the same time eat shepherd's pie, so you could kind of be in touch with your fake working class roots while drinking incredibly expensive champagne and hobnobbing with Geoffrey, Mary, the great and the good, and just feel thoroughly fabulous.
The lift whisked up to the umpteenth floor. There were enormous plate glass windows. He looked at me as if I was a long-lost friend, handed me the champagne, arm on the shoulder.
He asked where the toilet is, and he says, left at the Matisse.
Oh, come and look at the Picasso. And I went and looked at the Picasso. You were wowed. The best people came. And so other best people came because the other best people were already coming.
I mean, that's the classic bit of social climbing, isn't it? You know, I said, but isn't the truth, Geoffrey, that you have these parties and you just are using them? You're building up the brand of Geoffrey. He suddenly switched from being, you know, charming to raving. He just turned in an instant.
The brand of Jeffrey Archer was a strange mix of fact and fiction. The plot of his novels uncannily like the plot of his life.
I've not come across anybody who is anything like Jeffrey Archer. He sailed close to the wind all the time, because in First Among Equals he has a politician having sex with a prostitute. I mean, it's astonishing to see it.
And millions of viewers were also astonished when the book was made into a high-profile TV drama.
Like some company. Don't talk much, do you?
I'm sorry, I'm not really used to it.
All right, I understand.
He's certainly prepared to play around, to merge fact and fiction, life and fantasy. It's almost as though he's laughing at us.
On one hand, you do think he's got something. You know, he is a talented writer, but then the two worlds collide and you think, is he writing about his reality?
All authors go to real life to try and find their stories, and his was a bit more personal and sordid than we'd realised.
Even though Archer had his fictional politicians picking up sex workers, it didn't stop him denying it to the tabloids that he'd done exactly the same.
If you are very, very successful and the great and the good want to come and eat your shepherd's pie, you've got a beautiful wife, the children love you, you feel as if every wrong thing or untruth that you've told has somehow been justified. It reinforces your belief that you should carry on doing the same thing.
And you know they say about people, if he was chocolate, he'd eat himself. If he was chocolate, he'd melt himself down and spray himself over strawberries.
I did not swoon at his charm. I did not see that he was particularly beguiling. I didn't think of him as a seductive Casanova at all. I thought that he was somebody insufferably thrilled with himself, and that the charm was very superficial and, you know, switched on and switched off. You could see his smile come and then go. It faded so quickly.
He's almost like living a life as a character in one of his novels, and he thinks he can just decide how it's going to go.
I think politicians are risk takers, all of them, even the most sober and respectable. You have to be. It's a very, very risky trade. But they also, some of them, are not just risk takers, they go beyond that and are just total chancers.
It's about being so bowled over by how brilliant you are that you think that you can fool all of the people all of the time. And actually, a lot of the time you're right, and some of the time you're wrong.
When it comes to the allegations that he slept with a prostitute, Archer is betting everything on being right. He's taking the tabloids to court and he wants to win.
I kept on ringing him up saying, Geoffrey, you can't go ahead with this. You know, it's madness to do this. He said, oh, don't worry, Adam, it's all going to be settled. It's all going to be settled. And he kept on doing this right up until the trial was due to begin.
I mean, someone should have said, let it go, Geoffrey, but he didn't.
The court heard a woman who said she was a prostitute claim she'd met Mr. Archer in Shepherd's Market in London's Mayfair. Mr. Archer denied throughout that he'd ever met her.
Then you have journalists saying, well, actually, you know, he told us that he had met her at this phone call at this time. I was speaking to him, this is what he said.
Adam Raphael was one journalist who said Archer told him that he had indeed met sex worker Monica Coughlin.
I was always in a difficult position with Geoffrey because I realised that the conversation was confidential, unattributable. I said, look, if you do give evidence about our conversation and you proceed to tell a pack of lies, that will really free me from confidentiality. I will have to tell the court the truth.
And then you have his wife saying, well, no, I listened to those calls, and no, Geoffrey did not say anything of the kind.
Things that are said, they come back to haunt politicians, so they should be careful about what they say. Geoffrey has never been careful.
Most people, when they lie, will go, well, and will sort of, their shame will come through. When you have absolutely no sense of shame, like Geoffrey Archer, you can just go, I can tell you there's only one thing that matters in this court of law. I have not met this woman, I did not have sex with this woman, and that is the truth. And you can say that with such conviction, then you can get away with anything.
With the libel case looming, Archer is confident. He knows the evidence will find in his favour. Why? Because, as it turns out, he has made some of it up. It's the 6th of July 1987, and Geoffrey Archer, along with his wife Mary, is arriving at the High Court for the first day of his libel case against the Daily Star. The paper claims he paid Monica Coughlin for sex. Archer says it's a lie.
The story he came up with, which you'd have to be criminally gullible, was that he was giving her some money so she could go abroad and escape the journalists.
Not only is Mary there to deny what her husband told journalists about meeting Coughlin, so are all of Archer's friends.
His diary was passed around the High Court, and the jury looked at it and they saw that his appointments on that day meant he couldn't have seen the prostitute called Monica Coughlin.
Jeffrey Archer has these alibis and they're quite convincing. He's having very posh dinners with very posh friends who are very happy to go into court and say this is where he was at precisely this moment. He was having a delicious crêpe Suzette at Le Caprice, the very expensive restaurant, times when he could have been fraternising or worse with Monica Coughlin.
His story was watertight. He had friends in high places who were going to give alibis as to how he couldn't have possibly have been with this woman.
It was astonishing just how many alibi witnesses Jeffrey Archer managed to bring into court in his defence, and how many friends he'd met on the night in question.
But Monica Coughlin is also in court, and she says otherwise.
So in the Jeffrey Archer novel, First Among Equals, a politician is paying a prostitute for sex. And when she says, "What do you do for a living?" he says, "I'm a car salesman." Later, in court, Monica Coughlin tells the judge that Jeffrey Archer said he sold cars for a living.
In real life, I'm going to have sex with a prostitute and tell her I'm a car salesperson. And I'm going to put it in print. I'm going to have my character in a book have sex with a prostitute and claim to be a car salesperson. You have to have nuts of steel to do that.
And nuts of steel is exactly what Archer appears to have, because this isn't the first time he's twisted the truth. Turns out he's been at it for years.
Even at that stage, there were lots of things that had gone on in his life which were a bit puzzling.
When I did the research on him, there were a lot of things that didn't add up about his qualifications, where he went to school.
He looks like your headmaster. He looks like a head teacher. But then you discover he's done some terrible things.
He lied his way into Oxford University by fraudulently presenting A-level results.
He was directed towards a teaching college in Oxford, but it was a postgraduate teaching college. He didn't have a degree, he didn't have any A-levels.
He said that his father was a military hero. He wasn't. He was a convicted fraudster.
Jeffrey Archer claimed that he was Britain's youngest ever MP, and he was the fourth youngest.
At party conferences, he used to give enormous champagne parties, and I went to one of them, and he hushed everybody and said, "I've just got to go out and take a call from the Prime Minister." We thought, wow, out he goes, stands on the landing, comes back in, we're all agog. Later on, I discovered the Prime Minister was already talking to somebody else at that time. There was no possibility that he had had a word with the Prime Minister. He just made it up.
And he had a lot of affairs with a lot of women. Of course, he's married.
Even he was a police officer and had to retire from the police force.
What happens is you've got a snowball effect. It's the lie he told to get into Oxford, right? That worked. Then he gets into the Conservative Party. And slowly these things build up and you carry them with you. So it's not as if you can stop.
He simply invented things about himself that weren't true.
And asking about them causes him grief.
Something that Clive Anderson found out firsthand on his hugely popular chat show.
You were an athlete in your younger days, weren't you? Sorry, is that a controversial question? you ran for Oxford, ran for Britain, I think, once? Or
I actually met someone in at one of the by-elections the other day who actually could remember me running, and you need a very good memory for that.
I wonder if that sort of summed up your approach to life, that in athletics, in a sprint race, the idea is to get from A to B as quickly as possible, beating everybody else, with no other reason for it than doing that. Is that how you saw politics as well?
No. And the Conservative Party's been in power for 11 years now, so it's been a very long race.
I think he imagines the world to be as he now remembers it. So he thinks you're mad if you start suggesting, well, that wasn't quite like that, was it?
And when it came to his libel case against the Daily Star, Archer's imagination had gone into overdrive, creating a story so convincing he had almost everyone fooled.
There definitely will still have been a feeling in the party that he had been libelled and that it wasn't true.
He never gave any indication at any point that he was anything other than 100% innocent. Part of his defence was that he was married to Mary Archer, a wonderful example of British womanhood, so cultured, so intelligent, so he would not have stooped to pay for sex.
But that completely ignores the fact that many people are attracted to the absolute opposite. That's what turns them on. They want sex in a down-market environment with a prostitute where there's a very strong likelihood of being found out.
Jeffrey Archer's driven by excitement. That's what he wants.
Some people are like that. Some people are like that. To most of us, it's incomprehensible.
Ordinary people don't understand people like Jeffrey. He loved danger. He loved the adrenaline. He liked the thrill. He liked the excitement.
It seems obvious, but all of these possibilities completely escaped the judge in the libel trial. He only had eyes for Mary.
The judge would not believe Monica Coughlin, the prostitute, the sex worker, because the judge said, why would Jeffrey Archer have sex with a prostitute when he has a wife as fragrant as Mary?
I mean, we've got a long way to go with feminism, but I'd like to think that judges these days don't describe women like a sort of Thai curry.
Remember Mary Archer in the witness box, he said. Your vision of her probably will never disappear. Has she elegance? Has she fragrance? Is he in need of cold, unloving, rubber-insulated sex in a seedy hotel round about 1:45 on a Tuesday morning after an evening at Le Caprice?
He had a judge who was clearly head over heels in love with his wife. The psychological analysis by the judges was ridiculous. As the idea that never happens, or couldn't happen, or was unlikely to happen, is just such a poor analysis of the world.
And the summing up was absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it was like the judge was flirting with Mary Archer.
Mr. Justice Caulfield, the judge in that trial, effectively directed the jury to find in his favour.
The jury plays ball, and Jeffrey Archer wins his libel case. He had never paid for sex with Monica Coughlin.
He denied it so successfully that he won, and his innocence was established in court. Most of us assumed, that because a court had found one way, that was the truth.
Best-selling author Jeffrey Archer was awarded £500,000 in libel damages against the Star newspaper.
And Archer was triumphant. He gets his £500,000, and there he was back.
We were both under great tension, in particular Jeffrey was under great tension.
I'm damned if I'll spend the rest of my life with someone saying that I was out looking for a prostitute.
He hates party dressing in women. He's not a ladies' man at all.
And I think clearing the name was therefore very, very important. Yes, and I would go through it again, yes. And if it's necessary to go through it again with another newspaper, I will.
Mary, I wonder, weren't there times when you thought, how could he have dragged us into this?
No, I can't tell you why I didn't think it, because I suppose it's a reasonable question in the circumstances, but I didn't.
Jeffrey Archer would always bounce back, and sometimes he would bounce back higher than he'd started.
Once John Major had become Prime Minister, he gave him a peerage. And so he became Lord Archer of Weston-super-Mare. He must have thought that he was untouchable.
Archer has it all. A pal of the Prime Minister, a famous novelist, and with his newfound notoriety, an in-demand star of the chat show circuit, seen here on the popular Clive Anderson Talks Back.
Please welcome Jeffrey Archer. Now, I mentioned your former position, but your political career is sort of on the up again now. You were speaking at Bournemouth last week and got a rousing reception, we understand.
Yes.
It doesn't take long for Clive Anderson to push Archer on his ongoing political ambitions.
I mean, do you still have ambitions in that direction to be Prime Minister or anything like that?
I still enjoy politics more than anything else, certainly more than writing. And it's still something that I want to do.
Yes.
When I interviewed him, it was after he had won his libel case, against the Daily Star. That was not a comfortable experience, the interviewing. He did speak to my various producers and discussed forcibly as to whether the interview should be broadcast or not.
You're really catching on tonight, Glenn.
Yes.
Very fast.
Yeah. Thank you very much. You're a critic as well. There's no beginning to your talents. Now,
I have sort of bumped into him 2 or 3 times over the years since then. One of his other great skills is being an auctioneer at charity events, fundraising events. And he uses, and I'm not saying this to be critical, but he's quite a sort of bully, and he'll pick on people in the audience and say, oh, come on, whoever you are, you can afford a holiday in Tuscany. And but 1 or 2 times I've been in the audience, and he's not one to pick on me because he doesn't want to address me, which is a bit of a bonus, really, because I didn't want to have money forced out of me necessarily.
Hit satire show Spitting Image isn't taken in by his victory either, and the famous Archer capacity for lies makes prime-time TV.
What did your father do? He was a colonel in the Somerset Light Infantry. No, he was the British consul in Singapore.
No, he was in fact a journalist from North London who moved to Weston-super-Mare. Where did you go to school?
Wellington.
No, I can't accept that. You went to Wellington School, Somerset, not the famous Wellington School that you've always implied.
Happily for Archer, the Prime Minister isn't a fan of Spitting Image and doesn't share the growing scepticism of the media.
John Major sees Jeffrey Archer as a huge resource for the Tory party. He is famous, he is entertaining, he's incredibly eloquent.
Certainly with the party faithful, he would go around, he'd be a brilliant raconteur, he'd make everybody in a room feel special, slap a lot of backs, shake a lot of hands, kiss a lot of babies, so the members loved him.
And that's the success of Archer, that with both Thatcher and Major, they tolerated Archer and encouraged him because he cheered the party up.
Following his successful libel trial, Archer sets about working hard to ensure he regains favour with the Conservative Party.
He was part of Major's East Anglia mafia, and he had a proximity to power. We know he had the ear of the Prime Minister.
And in an attempt to impress the ear of the Prime Minister, Archer very publicly throws himself into charity work, and he chooses the Kurdish refugees. In Iraq in 1991, the Kurdish people were brutally attacked by Saddam Hussein and forced to flee in their thousands. It was a humanitarian crisis. A worthy cause, Archer decides to stage a Live Aid-style fundraising concert.
Archer staged the Simple Truth concert, and he claimed at the end of this process to have raised £57 million for the Kurds. But this was just a ridiculous exaggeration. He'd only raised a fraction of that sum himself.
A Scotland Yard investigation cleared Archer of any wrongdoing, but that didn't stop party colleagues paying attention.
The Kurdish fundraising scandal, we did notice, and it put another question mark against him in people's minds.
It takes a certain kind of person to go, oh, should we round that up to 57 million?
All sorts of other people had been involved in raising the £57 million sum, but Archer claimed that the whole lot was as a result of his efforts, which is very similar to what he did when he raised money for Oxfam at Oxford in the 1960s.
Back in the swinging 60s, Archer was making a name for himself as a fundraiser extraordinaire.
In the winter of 63-4, he raised lots of money for Oxfam, and he managed to enlist the Beatles, who'd just emerged on the scene. But then Archer decided that he was entitled to his own commission. So Archer ended up buying a couple of houses. Nobody knew where he'd got the funds from, but the suspicion was within Oxfam that he'd stolen it from them.
Archer always claimed he was legitimately owed a percentage on everything he'd raised, and Oxfam didn't take the matter any further.
My only failure was success. What happened was I did too well, and having gone to a charity that needed money, and they said, well, look, we haven't got any money to pay you, but if you were to do X, Y, or Z for us, we would give you 5%, or we would give you 10%. That seemed to me as honourable as you saying I sell motor cars.
He did actually meet the Beatles, And it's probably one of the few things in his early life that's actually totally true. But they saw through him as well. And Ringo Starr said, yeah, he's a nice fella, but he's the type who'd bottle your piss and sell it.
There was just a lot of shade and doubt and dodginess that seemed to pervade his entire life.
A posh con man, if you like. What does it stand for? It's confidence man. And Archer oozed confidence at all times.
These mega rascals, it's just double or quits all the time. And all the rest of us think, oh, I would have stopped there. But no, just keeps doubling down, just keeps taking bigger and bigger bets.
And as awful and scandalous as that is, there is an incredible skill to that, which you have to kind of go, oh, well done.
Once you get away with it, you go, great. Do that again, slightly bigger. Then you do it again and again. And the longer it goes, the more careless you get.
And in 1994, Jeffrey Archer starts to do just that. Stay with me, it gets a bit complicated. Archer's wife Mary, the fragrant one, is a member of the board of Anglia Television.
Hello and a very good morning to you.
Anglia Television is about to be bought by another company, but no one knows that, apart from the board. All of a sudden, Jeffrey decides to buy a shed load of shares for a friend. The information about the takeover of Anglia TV goes public. The shares jump in value, and the shares Jeffrey Archer bought make a cool 77 grand almost overnight. Eyebrows are raised, suggestions of insider dealing are made, and the shares hit the fan.
That very fragile house of cards starts to begin to shake just a little bit because there are allegations of insider trading of Anglia Television shares.
Now, there was an inquiry as to whether Archer had received information from Mary and whether Archer had then passed information on. And in the end, nobody was prosecuted. The Trade Department decided there wasn't enough evidence to bring a prosecution. And so, of course, Archer then says he's been exonerated. Well, he hadn't been exonerated. There just wasn't enough evidence to bring a prosecution.
With one potential hiccup dealt with, Archer is already laying the groundwork for his next power play, to be the first ever Mayor of London.
London needs a voice and London needs a champion.
But his past is about to catch up with him in spectacular fashion. It's the late 1990s, and despite the scandals in his past, Archer is on the rise yet again.
He's either at the top or at the bottom. When he's at the bottom, he climbs to the top again.
Most people, that would be it. You just whittle sticks for the rest of your life. It's hard to imagine him reflecting. I very much doubt Jeffrey Archer does that.
Every day, every hour, every minute, you spend looking back saying, oh, well, if only I hadn't done that, I'd now be Prime Minister. Well, that's drivel. Put that aside. You made a mistake. You made a fool of yourself. Shed the tears. Get on.
He had that sort of personality, and because of the size of that personality, people were prepared to give him that chance.
People are prepared to look the other way, and they're still going, oh, yeah, but look, I mean, he had his positives.
And look the other way they do, just as Jeffrey is eyeing up the role of London Mayor.
This golden opportunity when it's suggested that London needs a mayor, and he thinks, mate, this is me.
London needs a voice and London needs a champion.
He wasn't happy with just being the guy who turns up at the dinner to do the funny speech or the auction. He didn't just want to be the rich novelist, and that's, the job of Mayor of London. I can do it. I can prove myself to be a politician. I'll get the buses running on time.
Archer outlined his pitch for the top job in the capital in this frankly bizarre campaign film.
London has some serious problems. Crime, pollution, traffic. Some people say we just have to put up with them. I think they're wrong. I've travelled all over the world watching successful mayors in action, learning how they've changed things. I think we can change things in London. I began on the Greater London Council. I care passionately about this city. I have one simple aim: to improve the quality of life for all Londoners.
We had a terrible dearth of people of the right calibre and personality and charisma to stand for that very big office. Therefore, I think there was an acceptance that Geoffrey was the right man from that point of view.
Lo and behold, he becomes the Conservative candidate for Mayor of London.
He may be showered with applause at the Conservative Party conference, but his biographer, Michael Crick, isn't fooled, and his questioning of Archer's motives is getting under Geoffrey's skin. Will the real Geoffrey Archer please show himself?
Oh, hello, Mr. Crick. What do you think of Geoffrey Archer? Clip, clip, clip. Oh, come on. Who are you kidding? You wait till I'm mayor. You'll find out how tough I am.
But threats aside, that doesn't stop him making sure that everyone knows that Geoffrey Archer is back. He is all over the news.
Well, the Conservative Party is about to announce its candidate for Mayor of London. So it certainly looks as though Lord Archer has got it. We will be going live to Conservative Central Office.
And gets what he wants when his selection is announced.
Geoffrey Archer has been selected as the prospective Conservative candidate for Mayor of London.
I've been a fighter all my life, and I will use every bit of my energy to make the city in which I was born the safest, the cleanest, the most racially tolerant.
He wanted that platform, and he wanted people to be voting for him and saying, you're really important. To hear the applause, to be patted on the back.
We're waiting to see whether or not the Conservative Party allows questions.
But that temper is never far from the surface.
I do remember Lord Archer being hounded by journalists, particularly about his dealings with Anglia Television, which he almost got into trouble with.
Earlier, Lord Archer had been pursued into Central Office by his indefatigable biographer, Michael Crick. The writer was unceremoniously removed from Lord Archer's path.
And I'll never forget Michael Crick, who got so manhandled. There's a piece of footage where someone literally almost picks him up and throws him out the way. And you can see Michael Crick sort of really getting annoyed because he's being manhandled by Archer's people.
He was taken on one side and warned that questions were banned.
It's my job to ask questions, right? I'm a journalist. And it's also the job of your candidate to answer questions.
There will be no questions on that floor.
No, there's nothing. You can't stop questions.
Archer manages to stay out of fights with the press just long enough to get up at the Conservative Party conference and blow his own trumpet.
That I'm supported by Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister. I am supported by John Major, the former Prime Minister. And I'm supported by William Hague, the next Prime Minister.
You see in that speech that he believes in that. He believes he's got that trust.
William had given him an expression of unreserved admiration for Geoffrey.
This candidate is a candidate of probity and integrity. I'm going to back him to the full.
I certainly didn't say anything against him, but I was very careful not to give a picture of unalloyed admiration, because there was always within me a fear of a banana skin.
I always thought that Archer was going to be in trouble if he ran for Mayor of London. It happened even quicker than I thought.
He's bounced back from near bankruptcy, shrugged off allegations of improper share dealing, and survived, at least until now.
Seemingly out of nowhere, Geoffrey Archer is blindsided with a scandal so big it stops his mayoral ambitions dead in their tracks.
As a Londoner, it just makes me go, what a lucky escape that we didn't have a lying, cheating scoundrel as mayor. God, thank God that never happened.
He's practically in there, and then allegations of perjury rear their ugly heads. Oh no, Geoffrey's in trouble again.
The 1987 libel trial has reared its ugly head. Perjury, the accusation that Archer deliberately lied in court. Geoffrey? Never.
12 years ago, Lord Archer won £500,000 damages after the Star newspaper claimed he'd slept with a prostitute. Now his past has come back to haunt him. Today it emerged that Lord Archer had asked a friend to lie for him.
For many, the only surprise is that it took so long to come out.
Now, if I can discover plenty about him for the purposes of a 10-minute interview on the television, it must be possible for any of those leaders to have discovered enough about his background to say, "Ooh, I'm not sure we really want to hitch our wagon to this particular horse."
There had been warnings from senior Tories that Lord Archer was somebody with quite a past, with a gift for inaccurate précis, as his wife once gently put it.
When the story finally emerged that the whole libel thing had been a complete farrago of lies, its effect on us fellow MPs was dismay rather than shock. Dismay that he was as rum as that he had done that, and that we had all been taken in by it.
Lord Archer stunned Westminster today by standing down as the Conservative candidate for Mayor of London.
Archer had concocted in his defence various alibi witnesses who he had genuinely seen that evening, with others who he hadn't seen. The News of the World exposed a false alibi for the libel trial involving a friend of his called Ted Francis.
His old friend that had given him the alibi decided that enough was enough and he was running for London Mayor and he wanted the truth to come out.
It is left to his spokesman, Nadeem Zahawi, yes, that Nadeem Zahawi, who was the chairman of the Conservative Party, to make a statement outside his London penthouse.
I have made errors, some serious, some trivial. I have always hoped that my good points outweighed my bad, and that I could make a positive contribution to public life.
Journalists had been on the perjury story for years. Parliamentary backbenchers had begun to think that perhaps something wasn't quite right, but we had been quite persuaded by the evidence of alibis.
Archer had a great group of characters around him who were willing to defend him at considerable cost. I tried to understand what had gone on in this trial and why it had gone so wrong. And I began to realise that the alibi witnesses were actually bogus.
Having found that he's good at making things up and could put that into book form, then he should have stuck to it.
He just brazened it out. And then years later, it was the man who gave him the alibi who turned around and said, I can't carry on with this.
Archer's problem was that he had to rely on other people to do a lot of lying for him. And eventually that will break, because all you need is one unhappy customer who's going to go, yeah, I'm not really getting much out of this.
I disapproved of the idea of Geoffrey Archer becoming Mayor of London. That basically is the motivation.
Did he think you were a bit of a stooge that could be bought off, or...?
Probably.
Working with the Sunday newspaper, Francis secretly recorded phone calls to capture Archer's guilt.
Yeah, but we've got to be careful, Ted. Yeah. We don't want to go to court of law with it.
I guess if you are playing these tricksy games, you've always got the danger that somebody will turn. Ted Francis revealed that he couldn't live with himself knowing that this person was going to be Mayor of London. And so dropped him in it.
I was in the shadow cabinet when the scandals broke about the lies and the perjury. I was rung up and I said very sarcastically, "Oh, who's resigned now?" And he said, "Archer." And I thought...
Archer's past finally catches up with him and he is arrested.
The police say simply that a 59-year-old man's been arrested in connection with allegations of perverting the course of justice.
Geoffrey Archer became addicted to lying. He lied in his early life and he just couldn't stop. It became a way of life for him.
I mean, you have to be a certain kind of personality type to know that something that's said about you is true and go to great lengths to deny that it's true, to the point that you actually go to court and you sue the paper that said that you had done it for libel.
The building of the alibi that saved Geoffrey in the first trial was really
deliberate and actually criminal. It wasn't like I can't remember what I was doing that day. It was, oh no, I was with him.
Jeffrey Archer is thrown out of the Conservative Party for 5 years. The Tories make him pay the price for lying to his party.
We all knew Jeffrey Archer, in a sense, and in another sense, most of us didn't.
Archer has been ejected from his precious Tory party and is out on bail, pending trial for perjury.
Most people in these circumstances, if they'd suffered the embarrassment Archer had, would lie low. Instead, Archer wrote a play.
This guy, I mean, let's be honest, he's ahead of his time. He's out on bail, so he puts on a play called The Accused, where he plays the main part, a guy accused of murdering his wife. Little side note, if I was the police, I'd be, I'd have eyes on that.
And people had to vote as members of the jury. The audience and the theatre had to vote as to whether he should be acquitted or not.
Really, you couldn't make this up. What Freud would have to say about doing that, I just can't even begin to imagine. It really does beg a belief.
Where were you that night? I was out on an emergency call visiting a patient in Westminster. Why isn't that patient in court today to verify your statement? Because he died later that night. What time was on the death certificate? 10:27 p.m. Who signed the death certificate? I did. So, if you were signing a death certificate at 10:27, you couldn't have needed a more convincing alibi as Miss Mitchell claims. Miss Mitchell seems to think I can be in two places at once.
I mean, the sheer nerve of it, the nerve of it. And I think that is why he gets away with it, because I know I was open-mouthed when I saw that. I thought, Jeffrey, not even you, surely.
Arrested and facing a trial at the High Court on multiple counts of perjury, can Archer front it out? Or will his famous nerve finally break? It's 2001, and Jeffrey Archer is committed to stand trial at the Old Bailey. He is accused of getting friends to lie for him during his libel trial against the Daily Star 14 years earlier. A trial he won and bagged him $500,000 in damages. But if he loses now, he could be facing serious jail time.
So you might think that if you were facing a trial for perjury, you'd be really, really careful about your behaviour. Not Jeffrey Archer. He goes off to South Africa, allegedly to write. What he's actually doing is something carnal and incredibly exciting with yet another mistress, this time a lady called Nikki Kingdon.
And Nikki Kingdon is just the latest in a long line of Archer's lovers.
One of Jeffrey Archer's indiscretions got revealed in the News of the World, and it was still at that time where they used to do those adverts on a Saturday night where there'd be this girl that would look to camera and go, "I'm Sally, and I'll tell all about my steamy everything was steamy."
Hello, I'm Sally Farmerlow. I had an affair with Jeffrey Archer for 3.5 years. And tomorrow, for the first time, I tell my true story in the News of the World.
Everything was romp. They were steamy, they were romping, and I'm going to tell it all in the News of the World.
But it was far from his first affair. For years, Archer had been in a relationship with his assistant, Andrina Cahoon.
This affair that Archer had with Andy Cahoon was incredibly elaborate. I mean, basically, she was his live-in mistress in the flat in London during the week, and then he would go back to Cambridge and be with his wife Mary at the weekends. But every now and then, Mary came down to the flat, so Andrina was banished, and the photographs of Mary had to be restored, and everything had to be tickety-boo for Mary to stay for several days.
It must have been utterly exhausting to remember to change the photographs over who's in your house, whether it's the wife or the mistress, and hide the others away, or getting his secretary to buy presents. Once buying a mistress and his wife identical jewellery.
And that's another one of those things that an idiot bloke will think straight out of the gate will get him off the hook. He's like, baby, I didn't actually go and buy the presents. I got my secretary to do it for me, so I'm not that bad. And like, what did you get him? And it turns out he got him the same present.
I've always wondered about the mystery of why Mary stayed. He's embarrassed her time after time after time, and she's stuck with him. Most of us in our own lives just can't get our heads around that.
unless they're having it off left, right and centre themselves, in which case you go for it, Mary, because he's pretty much done most of London.
Maybe she finds him incredibly entertaining and dynamic and magnetic and charismatic, and she doesn't think she'll ever find anyone as exciting and as much fun to be around.
I think I would find it a little monochrome, a little grey, to have a sort of a more conventional life with a more conventional husband. Marriage is a complicated institution, isn't it? I mean, it's like a company in a way. It's a business.
But when it comes to marital fidelity, it really is the business of the couple themselves.
I think loyalty is important. If you mean strict sexual fidelity, it doesn't rank that terribly high on my scale of the importance of things in a quite objective sense.
Mary Archer is somebody that I admire because she stood by somebody who made a total fool of her.
And when it comes to the embarrassment of the perjury trial, Mary is at his side once again.
I'd meet him and I'd think, yeah, isn't he charming? Have I got it wrong? And then, of course, a few more thoughts, you'd think, no, I've got it absolutely right.
I mean, you have to invent a whole series of alibi witnesses, and you'd have to get them on board.
To be that narcissistic that you think, no, I'm not going to have this. They're saying these things about me, but I'm going to say they're absolutely not true because, He could have just moonwalked into the background and none of this would have happened.
How can I get one over everybody else? That's the mentality that con men grow up with and develop with. And when you look at the brazen things that he got up to. So, for example, I'll get out of it, but I'll fabricate the evidence. I'm going to have the confidence that I can put that past a judge and lawyers and get away with it.
Each little triumph kind of gave him confidence to do something bigger and more awful. And I think he believed his own lies as well. And he said it so convincingly and he lived so convincingly that really others believed in him, like he believed in himself.
I think we all understand that there are circumstances in which men are driven by their heart rather than their head or another part of their anatomy. But most people wouldn't then sue the newspapers for libel when they have told what appears to be the truth about the matter.
This truth had never been lost on Monica Coughlin, but she wasn't at the trial.
The one person who wasn't there, and perhaps should have been, is Monica Coughlin.
Monica Coughlin, who was at the centre of Lord Archer's libel trial 14 years ago, has been killed in a car accident.
She'd actually been killed only a couple of weeks before the trial started.
Jeffrey Archer had no regard for her family, her mental health. He treated her like trash with his alibi. He stood in that court and Monica Coughlin was made to look like a liar.
The walls are closing in on Jeffrey Archer. The lies are catching up with him. Running out of options, his fate is held in the hands of a jury, and it isn't looking good. It's 2001, and after 14 years, the lies that Archer told under oath about his encounter with a sex worker have finally caught up.
The court's heard that he had to establish his whereabouts at the time he was accused of meeting a prostitute.
When I think of Jeffrey Archer, I conjure up in my head a slightly devilish figure of incredible self-belief, narcissism, and want of power.
I think some people closed their eyes to what was wrong with him and what he did because they enjoyed his hospitality. They enjoyed his conversation. Free champagne, off you go, fantastic views. You go to a party, you'll meet lots of other politicians from all parties. He was very clever like that, using bonhomie as a way of getting people to lower their guard.
Whether it was guests at his parties or people who worked for him, Archer was an expert at manipulating those around him, including his old secretary, Angela Peppiatt, a woman who, it turns out, has the power to put the final nail in Jeffrey's coffin.
Lord Archer's former secretary has told the Old Bailey that he asked her to buy an out-of-date diary. The prosecution claims he used the diary to create a bogus one to help his successful libel action against the Daily Star newspaper in 1987.
It emerges that his attention to detail is quite remarkable, and he had sent his secretary, a lady called Angela Pepiat, out to track down a diary from the year before and then retrospectively fill it up.
To create a false diary, the actual doing of it, the writing of it, is not difficult. You can easily put in, had a meeting that took me right until 2 a.m, but you need to have somebody there say, oh, no, this is the diary.
There's got to be as a secretary. That's a weird day at work, isn't it? OK, new entry, 28th of January last year. Just checking if she... Is this cool with you? Is this cool? OK. And another one, when I went to see that woman who I didn't know, who I ended up paying to leave the country.
He dictated to her where he was supposed to have been on these dates, even though, of course, he wasn't really.
Angela Pepiat kept photocopies of Archer's fake diary, complete with all the bogus entries. The real diary never saw the light of day.
He got people to lie on his behalf. So he kind of pulled these people into his own lie and the double world that he was living in.
And the one person who had a ringside seat to that double life was Mary Archer.
There was no sign of Mary Archer at the family's Cambridgeshire home today.
It's always been difficult to work out much about Mary Archer from her appearances in these court cases. She sort of went through the motions.
There was a view of Mary Archer that she lived in a world of her own. She had her own career, which she evidently did. She didn't really know what Geoffrey was doing.
She is the most honest human being I have ever met in my life. I don't think she knows how to lie. She is unable to deceive.
On the other hand, there was also a view of Mary Archer that she was an extremely astute and highly intelligent person, and it was really hard to square that astute, intelligent person with the view that she had absolutely no idea what was happening.
He left his London home, heading for the Old Bailey. As he stepped out with Lady Archer, he raised a smile after a van driver had wished him luck. And a short time later, that luck would desert him, as the past finally caught up with Geoffrey Archer.
Lord Archer's been found guilty of perjury and jailed for 4 years. Disgrace for the millionaire novelist who conned his way to the centre of power.
If he hadn't sued, it might never have ended up in court. He might never have ended up in jail. But he was just somebody who always thought he could get away with whatever he was doing, but he pushed it too far.
Mary Archer once emerged from court as a woman noted for her fragrance. Today she left the Old Bailey, the wife of a criminal. He has a penthouse flat and a country home. Tonight, Belmarsh Prison in South London is Geoffrey Archer's new address.
When he was exposed really as a crook, never really knew him. Oh, Geoffrey who? No, Geoffrey Archer? Oh, call that one, yeah, that. No, I never fell for it. Yes, they did.
But it takes more than prison to get Geoffrey Archer down.
Geoffrey Archer gets sent down into prison, into the cell, 4 years, bang to rights. What does he do?
He gets a book deal. He gets a huge book deal. Talk about bouncing back. Talk about a Teflon Tory. It should have buried him. That should have been the end of it. But it just didn't stick. He turned it to his own advantage.
He's in prison, but somehow he's the winner. He's triumphant. He's ahead of the game. He's got the last laugh.
He's the sort who will never be ruined. He'll always bounce back. He's got that bomb-proof personality.
Downing Street said there were no plans to strip Lord Archer of his peerage. MPs sent to prison have to leave Parliament. Peers don't.
How can someone who's committed perjury, who's really sullied the reputation of a completely innocent woman, still have a peerage? It's just disgusting.
He's still a lord, isn't he? He's still Lord Archer, having done time in prison for perjury. I mean, the whole country's getting done by Geoffrey Archer still.
I know he's in contact with ministers because he took a call from one of them when I was with him. So he's still politically involved. It's in his blood. He's a Conservative. He's not going to let that go.
So what is the moral of the Jeffrey Archer story?
If he walked in this room today, he'd be ebullient, full of himself, 100% confident. Now, that is amazing.
Ultimately, who's the winner here? This guy essentially broke the law and went to prison. And yet, his reputation, has it suffered that much? No, not really. I think he's got away with it.
You'd like to think Jeffrey Archer was a man who got his comeuppance. I think he'd consider himself to have come out on top on this.
Normal people ask, why would a man, time and again, walk back into the fire and get burnt, and walk back into the fire and get burnt? They like the fire. They don't mind getting burnt, and they want to go out in a blaze of glory.
The lesson, kids, is lie and believe in your lies and cheat and absolutely never admit that you're ever guilty of anything, and you might get away with it.